Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1988 slasher sequel, Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers. Now, Halloween 4 is directed by Dwight H. Little. Features a screenplay by Alan B. McElroy. It stars Donald Pleaseance, who returns as Dr. Loomis. You have some newcomers in Ellie Cornell, who plays Rachel, as well as Danielle Harris, who plays Jamie, who is the daughter of Laurie Strode. George P. Wilbur puts on the iconic mask and the jumpsuit and portrays Michael Myers throughout most of the movie, with Tom Morga doing some work as well. He was initially the first guy who was cast to play Michael Myers, but I think one of the producers wasn't really that big on what he was doing with the character, so instead they went with stuntman George P. Wilbur. Michael Pataki, who was Drago's not necessarily henchman, but Drago's handler from Rocky 4. He is in this cast as Dr. Hoffman. You have Beau Starr, who plays Sheriff Ben Meeker. In essence, a more badass, take charge sheriff than Sheriff Brackett. So it's still another sheriff who's helping Loomis. But this time around, it doesn't seem like it's just the same sort of character. You also have Kathleen Kinmont, the Bride of Reanimator herself, who plays Kelly Meeker, who is Sheriff Meeker's daughter. And she's a part of this love triangle that's going on throughout the film between her and Sasha Jenson's character Brady, as well as Ellie Cornell's character Rachel, where Rachel, she thinks that Brady is going to be hers, but Brady winds up going on a date with Kelly, and, you know, the usual drama ensues. There's a few other actors and actresses in the cast, but that's the majority of the cast members for this film. Features a score by Alan Howarth, who wound up composing the entirety of the score without really that much involvement or input from John Carpenter this time around. It features some cinematography by Peter Lyons Collister, and it's edited by Curtis Clayton. Has a running time of about 88 minutes, and it cost about $5 million to make, and it made $17 million in the box office in 1988. So it did a pretty good job when it comes to raking in the bucks for a fairly low budget affair. Now, the film that wound up getting made, the film that exists on home video, was not initially the first planned film for the fourth installment in the Halloween franchise. Cannon Films actually got really close to doing a Halloween 4. After the success of Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, Cannon, being Cannon Films, decided that they wanted to look for another horror franchise that they could milk and could get more money out of, and Halloween was something that was actually affordable and up for grabs, because Halloween 3 Season of the Witch was such a disappointment financially and critically that the franchise was in essence at a low point and was being fire sailed. So I think Canon, actually, I think they might have actually gotten the rights temporarily, and they were going to do a Halloween 4, depending on what rumor you hear or what source you find. John Carpenter and Deborah Hill were involved at one point. Apparently John Carpenter and author Dennis Etchison, who wrote the novelizations of Halloween 2 and 3 under the pseudonym Jack Martin, he had wrote a draft with John Carpenter that would have taken place 10 years after the events of Halloween and Halloween 2, and it would deal with the aftermath, the legacy of this night of horror, and the legacy of Michael Myers, and the effect that that has had on Haddonfield and its citizens. It was going to paint Michael Myers as someone who is actually dead, but still very much alive in terms of his impact and his influence on the town and other people and how they view Haddonfield. And it would have delved into concepts and themes that actually would be used in later films in the franchise, like the idea that Halloween is banned in Haddonfield, and some of the other theories and some of the other sort of stuff. But mainly, that was the main thing that would actually go on to be used in later films in the series. And there's something about Michael Myers' spirit, or maybe they might have done something along the lines of Friday the 13th Part 5, but ultimately that was not made. I think Canon either ran out of money or just ultimately didn't decide to go with it and did not decide to make the film. So Moustapha Akkad got involved and he bought the rights to the Halloween franchise, and it was his decision to move away from what he called a more cerebral take on a Halloween sequel, and passed on Carpenter and Etchison's concept for Halloween 4 in favor of a concept that was more in line with the familiar, to take the franchise back to its roots, back to square one, and really give the fans more of what they probably were wanting. And if you look at the film's box office, the decision that Akkad decided to make was a wise one. But I have to be honest, as much as I do like this film, it would have been really interesting to have seen what Carpenter and Etchison's idea of a fourth Halloween film would have been like. I think it had a lot of potential, especially the idea of really focusing on Haddonfield and its citizens, and dealing with the aftermath and of the events 10 years ago, and talking about how that affects people, affects and it ultimately infects an entire town. And I think you really could have played around with paranoia and some things, and I think it honestly would have had a lot of potential. Definitely would have been more unique, wouldn't be as derivative and familiar as Halloween 4, but I also feel that it would not have been as successful as The Return of Michael Myers. Maybe it might have gotten a cult following, much like Halloween 3, many, many years later, but it definitely would have been one of those films that would not have been that profitable. And with the fact that with the fact that Halloween 3 didn't do very well, if that happened again, the franchise honestly could have been dead. Could have been dead and buried, and possibly for good, at least for a long time. So at the end of the day, the decision to pass on that more cerebral concept ultimately is what kept this franchise alive, for better or for worse. And I'm happy with the decision that Akkad ultimately made, despite how interesting that other version of Halloween 4 might have been. Alan B. McElroy, his screenplay is something that he wrote over the span of 11 days. He was under a massive time crunch because the writer's strike was looming. He was brought on board to write the film because not only was he a big fan of the franchise, but he was close friends with the director, Dwight H. Little. Dwight H. Little was brought on board because Akkad saw his film Bloodstone, and he thought that he did a good job with a low budget, so he thought that was the right kind of guy that he wanted to direct Halloween 4. And Dwight H. Little's direction, I think at times it's not as dynamic as Carpenter's work or even Rosenthal's Carpenter Light, but I think he did a decent enough job. when it comes to the moments in the film that need to be a little bit more suspenseful, or bring in some genuine feelings of terror, I feel that he definitely manages to convey those feelings and those emotions well. He is absolutely a capable director. I mean, even at this point, as a young filmmaker, only had one film under his belt. I mean, shots like the sequence in the gas station where the camera zooms in on Michael Myers with the bandages on. I thought that was a really great looking shot. And the way that he shot the uh, chase sequence where Michael Myers is chasing after Jamie and Rachel on top of the roof of this house. I thought that was really well shot, as well as a sequence later on when Michael Myers jumps into the back of a pickup truck and is throwing guys onto the street. So, when it comes to the action, when it comes to those moments, I really thought that Dwight H. Little did a really solid job. I also feel that when it comes to more atmospheric moments that were more in the shadows and so on and so forth, I felt that he was very capable with that too, especially in the nightmare sequences early in the film. And it seems like he ran a pretty tight ship and helmed the project really well, got along with his cast and crew, which is very important when it comes to a director creating the right environment for the cast to work in. And his involvement and his relationship with Alan B. McElroy is a big reason why we have the solid script that we do. Because of their friendship, that's the reason why Alan was brought on board. And Alan, I thought he really did a wonderful job with this script, considering the time constraints. A lot of the criticisms that people have for the screenplay, they are things that he wanted to include in the film, but couldn't include for budget reasons, or for the fact that they were unable to get the rights or something from Universal to use footage from Halloween 2. He wanted to start the movie with footage from Halloween 2 to more directly connect this film to the events of Halloween 2. He wanted to start the film out with sequences from the climax of Halloween 2 and then shoot a new sequence that shows Loomis getting blown out of the room and showing how and why he survived. But for whatever reason, that sequence was not shot. It was not ultimately meant to be. He had other more grand ideas for the finale of this film. He was going to have the entire building, the entire house was going to be on fire while Jamie and Rachel are trying to stay one step ahead of Michael Myers on top of the roof while it's in flames. But that would have cost more money that they didn't have. But it was his idea to have the surprise, the shock ending with Jamie inheriting whatever the curse is that Michael Myers got all those years ago, and killing her stepmother. And it was his idea to have the vigilantes and to have that element in the screenplay. It was also his involvement that brought in the characters of Jamie and Rachel. And ultimately, I feel that Jamie Lee Curtis's character, Laurie Strode, being written off and dying in a car accident off screen was not the best decision. But I'm not going to be too hard on Alan because, once again, 11 days. And also, Jamie Lee was actually asked to return, but she refused. She declined to return to the franchise. So, you're under a time constraint. You need to find a way to have Jamie have some sort of connection to Michael Myers and to have a reason why he would go after her, and to also have a reason why she would be so close to him in order for this transfer of evil to occur, to make the film's twist ending actually happen. So I actually don't mind the fact that Jamie is the daughter of Laurie Strode. But I would have gone in a different route. I would have made it so Lori doesn't die in a car accident. She just disappears. She mysteriously vanished and she hasn't been seen, and it leaves things up in the air to whether or not she might be alive for future sequels. Which is something that H2O wound up doing, is saying that she faked her own death, that she is alive, but she just wound up faking her own death. Um, and I don't like how Rachel is written early on in this screenplay. She comes across as a little bit too bitchy, and I can see why a lot of audiences didn't necessarily have the best first impression with her character. I feel that things start off pretty bumpy and rocky with her when it comes to her character and her relationship with Jamie. But as the film goes on, the script really starts to build a genuine bond between the two, and it makes Rachel a very likable, personable, and genuinely cool and badass character and heroine in the vein of Ripley. There's a dynamic between Rachel and Jamie that's very similar to the dynamic between Ripley and Newt in Aliens, and I think that's to the film's benefit. And like I said, there are other things. Like, I really like the vigilante stuff. I think that's a really cool touch, a nice, interesting touch for the franchise. But yes, there is a lot of moments in the screenplay that are very familiar. Michael Myers is at the sanitarium. He also somehow survived, which you could deal with because, he's the embodiment of evil. Like, there's not a soul left there. That part of him died years ago. So you could totally understand why he would somehow survive something like that. Because there's this force inside him that's driving him that is supernatural. So, but what I mean by a lot of the same is because he escapes not necessarily the exact same way as he escaped in Halloween, but he still escapes, and he winds up in Haddonfield, and Jamie is wearing the same clown costume that young Michael Myers did all those years ago. There's a sequence in the film that kind of plays around with the Ben Tramer kind of thing, but instead of just one person dressed up as Michael Myers, it's two people. There you have another sheriff working with Loomis. Loomis is back, and he's in Haddonfield trying to stop Michael Myers from killing again. It's a lot. There are similarities, so to speak. I could see why some people view this as a pretty derivative film when it comes to a sequel, because in a lot of ways it is very similar in terms of its storyline and its beats as the 1978 film. But I don't think it's a straight up Xerox or a lazy copy and paste job, because of the fact that Alan B. McElroy does throw in some other things. The characters are Rachel and Jamie. The whole stuff with the vigilante mob, and the ultimate twist in the end, which would have taken the franchise into a completely different direction, while still a fairly familiar one, but something that really you didn't really see coming. And ultimately that didn't happen, and I don't really hold that against Alan. It's not his fault that the subsequent sequels fucked it all up. But yeah, I think it's a pretty solid script. Has some nice lines of dialogue too. The same kind of really genuinely chilling lines of dialogue for Loomis to say, and some fun quips here and there where where the film decides to provide some moments of levity, and some really fun set pieces, and there's a lot of things when it comes to this screenplay that I genuinely enjoy. I think a lot of it comes down to these characters, even though Rachel starts out a little bit iffy in terms of her likability. Once you get past that rough patch, she's a really likable character. And I think in large part that's due to what Alan provided when it comes to the character development, and also, the performance by Ellie Cornell. And speaking of the performances, I think this film has a lot of solid performances as well. Some really good performances by the cast. I personally feel that Donald Pleasance's work in this is the last really genuinely great Loomis performance. I think Halloween 5 has its moments, and so does Halloween 6, but they're uneven. I felt that this was very even in terms of its high quality, and Donald Pleasance jumped back into the role as if he just, started filming right after he stopped filming in Halloween 2. That just speaks to the professional that he is, and his involvement in this really did add to the authenticity of this sequel, and really did help it work, having Loomis back into the fold and facing off against Michael Myers another time. But the newcomers, like I said, they really hold their own too. And Ellie Cornell, she was cast because she has this girl next door kind of vibe. And in a lot of interviews, she seems to have this kind of low view of herself, like she's not the hot girl. I respectfully disagree. I think she's beautiful. I've always thought she was beautiful, and honestly, I think she is the hot girl, but she's also the girl next door. She's personable, she's relatable, she's somebody that you feel like you could actually talk to and approach, unlike some of the other supermodel heroines in other films in this franchise, or in other films from this particular era. And Danielle Harris already shows here that she is she was a rising star when it comes to a young actress. There so many times you see young actresses, young girls get pretty meaty roles like this and just don't really provide much other than like average performance quality. But that's not the case with Danielle Harris. She showed that she was really game. She was very mature for her age, and also incredibly capable when it comes to performing in front of the camera. You bought all the emotions that she was supposed to convey. You bought that she was genuinely scared and terrified in the moments that needed it. And the character was also written in a way that she was somebody that you felt for and you rooted for, along with Rachel, to survive and to defeat Michael Myers. And, when it comes to Michael Myers, I thought George P. Wilbur did a decent enough job, too, as the Shape. I don't think he's as good as Dick Warlock, but I still feel that he handled himself well enough. He still made Michael Myers intimidating when it comes to his presence. I never really felt that Michael Myers was like a weakling or something or someone that should not be taken seriously. Beau Starr, I also really liked his performance as Sheriff Meeker. He had this very, trying to think of the right word, yeah, rock solid presence. It was a very rock solid character and personality, and I feel it really did lend to the credibility of Beau playing this sheriff, who, along with this Michael Myers task force, would blow him away in the end with just what seems like hundreds of tons of lead. And Kathleen Kinmont and Sasha Jenson, they do all right with what they're asked to do. and so do the other cast members throughout the film. Kathleen Kinmont isn't supposed to be a likable character, so she plays her bitchy role well. Brady, I don't think the actor is really that talented or that great, but and honestly, I feel the screenplay, they try to make him into this kind of heroic figure at one point in the film. And I don't think it's really that effective because throughout the movie you've just seen that he's really a guy who would do anything to get into a hot girl's pants. He doesn't think twice about going with Kelly when he was supposed to go out with Rachel. Um, so the guy kind of comes across as a dick, to be perfectly honest. You can't really blame him, hormones and whatever, but at the same time, I think the way that he was written could have been a little bit better. But yeah, overall, some solid performances by the cast. The score by Alan Howarth, it's hit and miss for me. I appreciate his experimental work here. I appreciate he's trying to think outside the box, and he has some more atmospheric sort of notes here and there. But I don't know, like the score just, other than the Halloween theme, the score really doesn't do a whole lot for me. It seems like he did this score more as an experiment than anything else, and hey, that's fine. Um, but it just isn't really a score that really stands out to me other than the main theme. The cinematography by Peter Lyons Collister, I thought it was it was good. I wouldn't say it was great, but it was good. The film definitely had a decent enough size and scope to it. Sequences that needed to have a little bit more darker mood and atmosphere, I feel he handled those shots pretty well, as well as Dwight H. Little. Um, and I felt it definitely was edited well, especially in the more exciting sequences in the film. But speaking of exciting scenes, I gotta be honest, I feel the film could have used a little bit more of that, a little bit more excitement, a little bit more action, maybe a little bit more kills, maybe a little bit more gore. Um, and apparently, the little bit of gore that's in it those were reshoots. They were added into the film after the fact because even Mustafa Akkad, who at the time he didn't want it to be that bloody because he was very averse and was squeamish when it comes to blood. Uh, he even realized that the core audience that he's going to be selling this film to at this particular time in the 80s, they wanted it to be gory. They wanted the blood. And so he put some more money into doing these sequences that John Carl Buechler shot. And it got to the point on the set where Akkad, he's the one who's saying, "More blood! More blood! There's not enough blood! More blood!" Which I find pretty funny. This guy who was so adamant against it being that bloody because he wants to be as close to the first film in spirit as possible, and then he's the one who's like, "More blood! There's not enough! I want the blood to fill the screen!" And even though he said that he wanted more blood, there still isn't really that much blood. So there's a sequence during the ambulance breakout where Michael Myers sticks his thumb in some guy's head, and that's actually a really, cool looking effect, and that's one of the more standout sequences when it comes to the film's makeup effects. Then there's another moment where one of the vigilantes gets his head ripped and there's some blood that pours out. And I think there might have been one other little moment, but for the most part, it's not that bloody of a film. And a lot of the more gory parts of the movie are aftermath shots, like the sheriff. The sheriff's not really the sheriff, but the deputy who works for the sheriff, who's hanging out in the house with everybody, and he gets killed by Michael Myers. And you see his severed head and like his arm like bent over. and the aftermath during the massacre at the police station. Apparently, there's a rumor that that sequence was actually shot, but it was cut. And if that's the case, that's a mistake to cut that scene. Apparently, it was cut for pacing issues, according to this rumor. But I think that's a missed opportunity. I think that would have helped the film be even better if you had that sequence of Michael Myers just going to town and just fucking up a bunch of police officers. Um, but there's still some good stuff here. Kathleen Kinmont, when she gets killed with the shotgun, I thought it was very creative use of the shotgun and very different. Even though you don't really see a lot, you don't really see anything in terms of gore, it's still an effective death because it's a different use of the shotgun than what you normally see. So, and there were some other moments that had this effective brutality to them, but yeah, that is something about the film I would have liked to have seen more of. It's like it's a little bit more blood, a little bit more gore, because at this point in 1988, this is the slasher, franchise era where you had countless Friday the 13th films already and Nightmare on Elm Street movies, and they all were trying to up the ante, and this doesn't really feel like it really went there as much as I think it could have. And I know it's a different kind of franchise than those, but I think it should have just embraced the fact that this is what, the audience wants. The audience wants, tons of blood and gore. That's what they want. That's what they're asking for. And I think even today, I think there are some people who, just like myself, would have really liked this film even more if it really did deliver the gory goods. Because other than a few scenes, it really isn't that gory. But there's a lot of genuine merit when it comes to this film. It goes by at a pretty good pace. I don't think it's as boring as some critics make it out to be, because I actually did get invested in the characters. I actually did care about Rachel, even though she starts off kind of bitchy. I actually did ultimately learn and actually like that character. So those sequences when she's being hunted and being stalked by Michael Myers were actually genuinely suspenseful for me, as well as the moments when Jamie's getting chased by Michael or stalked by him, especially the sequence in the schoolhouse. Like, I thought that was a really well done and suspenseful scene, despite the glaring issues, like the wrong Michael Myers mask, where Michael Myers looks like all of a sudden he's got a surfer bro haircut and blonde hair, and looks like he's gonna be hanging out at Malibu Beach. But that's only because of an error in when it comes to the part of the stunt guy who grabbed the wrong mask for the shoot, and it was a low budget film, so they didn't really have the time to do any reshoots by the time Final Cut was over with. And that's also because they had a hard time getting the actual mask from the first two films, so they had to do some weird kind of jerry-rigging kind of thing to try to make a new mask, and the first mask was wrong. It had pink coloring on the front of the mask, and had blonde hair, so they had to ultimately repaint it. And that's also why the mask looks so weird. That's why Michael Myers has this slicked back hair, and why the paint on the mask is very bumpy, because they had to spray paint it white. So yeah, there's a lot of things that genuinely do work with Halloween 4. I wouldn't say it's a great film, but it's a movie that I do enjoy, and ultimately I feel is one of the better sequels and what is honestly a pretty lackluster franchise for me personally. And this is the last. Well, I mean, I also enjoy H2O quite a bit, but other than H2O, I can't really think of another Halloween sequel that I really liked. So it's just all downhill from here for the most part until they do yet another reboot, because that's the thing with this franchise. It manages to do the improbable when it comes to sequels like Halloween 4, doing all these things all these years later, but actually managing to make a pretty decent film and a pretty enjoyable sequel in its own right, and giving fans a reason to want to see this franchise continue, and then they just fuck up all the goodwill, all of the momentum that was built up and done well in Halloween 4 with the subsequent sequels so badly to the point that they had to start over, and even then they do it again and fuck all the goodwill and momentum that they somehow beat the odds and managed to build up again for the second fucking time, and then they fuck it all up. It's just, this franchise is just one continuous fuck up with very little moments in between where they get it right. So this was one of those times, one of those moments, one of those blips in the Halloween franchise where they got it right and they didn't fuck it up.